Let's be realistic about expectations here.
The mahogany boardroom gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Richard Blackstone adjusted his Italian silk tie, his pale fingers drumming against the $50,000 conference table. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched below like a kingdom he'd built, with his own hands and the corpses of those who'd trusted him. At 62, the pharmaceutical CEO still commanded every room he entered, even as cancer cells quietly devoured his liver in what felt like cosmic justice finally catching up. "Let's be realistic about expectations here," Richard said, his voice carrying that calm authority that had destroyed countless lives over 3 decades. He studied the young Latina woman across from him, Emily Rivera, 23, wearing a discount store blazer that practically announced her desperation. Her research folder was held together with rubber bands, her shoes showed scuff marks from subway grates, and her community college transcript sat like an accusation against the Harvard diplomas lining his walls. People from your background typically struggle in environments that require sophisticated understanding. He continued, each word calibrated for maximum psychological damage. The pharmaceutical industry has protocols, safety standards, regulatory frameworks that, frankly, he gestured dismissively at her appearance, aren't accessible to everyone for good reason. Emily's dark eyes flashed with something between fury and recognition, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Blackstone, my research shows your new drug could save thousands of lives if we adjust the delivery method. The molecular structure I've developed could revolutionize cancer treatment." "Sweetie." Richard interrupted with that patronizing smile that had made him millions while patients died. "That's adorable that you think you understand biochemistry at this level, but this is serious science, not a community college science fair project." What Emily didn't know was that Richard recognized her name from files he'd buried 15 years ago, files about experimental drug trials conducted on charity patients without their informed consent. Files that included her grandmother's death as acceptable collateral damage in his quest for pharmaceutical dominance. Before we dive into what happens next, and trust me, the revelations about Emily's past will destroy everything you think you know, smash that like button if you're ready for the most shocking plot twists in medical drama history. Subscribe, because what Emily discovers about Richard will make your blood boil. Now back to our story, where nothing is what it seems. Emily Rivera's worn Converse squeaked against the marble floor of Blackstone Industries as she entered what she didn't yet know was the den of the man who'd killed her grandmother. The building rose 60 floors into the Manhattan sky, built on patents stolen from researchers who died before they could claim credit, funded by medications priced beyond the reach of the people who needed them most. Officer Jenkins, the security guard, whose paycheck depended on keeping undesirables out of corporate heaven, tracked her movement with practiced suspicion. He'd been trained to spot people who didn't belong, immigrants, minorities, anyone whose appearance suggested they might question the natural order of wealth and power. Innovation competition. Emily said, showing him the email confirmation that had taken her 3 years of perfect grades and 18-hour workdays to earn. What she didn't know was that the competition was Richard's annual ritual of humiliating promising researchers from disadvantaged backgrounds, a psychological game he played to remind himself that he deserved his wealth because others deserved their poverty. The lobby was designed to intimidate 60 feet of polished granite reaching toward a ceiling painted with Renaissance frescoes that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Emily had spent 3 years developing her breakthrough while working double shifts at Rosita's Diner, surviving on determination and instant ramen. But nothing had prepared her for the sheer audacity of a building constructed on human suffering. 20th floor, Tiffany, the blonde receptionist, said with a smile that could cut glass. She'd been hired not for her qualifications, but for her ability to make certain types of people feel unwelcome without saying anything actionable. Try not to touch anything you can't afford to replace. In the elevator, Emily caught her reflection in mirrors that had witnessed 3 decades of dreams being crushed. Her dark skin still carried the flush of subway heat, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail her mother had taught her clothes that announced her poverty to anyone with functioning eyes. But Emily had something these people didn't, a solution that could revolutionize cancer treatment born from 15 years of rage at a system that had murdered her grandmother while pretending to heal her. She just didn't know yet that the man who'd ordered that murder was waiting for her 60 floors above the ground. Richard Blackstone's corner office was a museum of pharmaceutical conquest walls, lined with patents worth billions awards from medical institutions. He'd corrupted photographs with politicians whose campaigns he'd funded to ensure favorable drug regulations. Behind his massive desk, a family portrait showed his late wife, Dr. Sarah Blackstone, whose accidental death had been the most profitable tragedy of his career. He was reviewing quarterly reports when Emily entered numbers that painted a picture of controlled scarcity medications that could be produced for dollars but sold for thousands. Research suppressed because cures were less profitable than treatments, and a carefully maintained system that killed the poor while enriching the elite. "Ms. Rivera," he said, without looking up, savoring the moment before he destroyed another hopeful researcher. He'd perfected this routine over decades, the dismissive greeting, the casual humiliation, the systematic destruction of anyone who might threaten his empire. "You have 5 minutes to entertain me before security removes you from premises I own." Emily spread her research across his desk, molecular diagrams that represented 3 years of 18-hour days test results printed on paper she'd bought, with tip money projections that had consumed every free moment of her existence. "Your current cancer drug fails because traditional delivery methods can't penetrate tumor vasculature effectively, but my modified nanoparticle system increases bioavailability by 300% while reducing systemic toxicity." Richard studied her work with the practiced eye of someone who'd stolen enough research to recognize genuine innovation. What he saw made his blood run cold. Emily had independently developed the same delivery system his secret research team had been working on for 5 years, but her approach was more elegant, more effective, more revolutionary than anything his Harvard-educated scientists had achieved. "Where did you complete your doctoral research?" he asked, already knowing the answer would give him the ammunition he needed to destroy her credibility. "Harvard, MIT, surely someone with such ambitious ideas must have impressive institutional backing." "Queen's Community College," Emily said quietly, watching his expression shift from calculated interest to predatory satisfaction. "Community College." Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in a gesture that had preceded the destruction of countless careers. "Ms. Rivera, pharmaceutical development requires institutional resources, peer networks, regulatory understanding that simply isn't available in community educational settings." What Richard didn't say was that Emily's grandmother Rosa had died 15 years ago as a test subject in his illegal drug trials, that her death had provided the data he'd used to develop the very medications Emily was now trying to improve. He'd built his fortune on the corpses of charity patients whose families never knew they'd been murdered for profit. "Keep dreaming," Richard said, pressing the button that summoned security, with the casual cruelty of someone who'd perfected the art of legal murder. "But do it somewhere else. This is a place for real science." As Officer Jenkins appeared in the doorway, Emily gathered her research with hands that shook, not from fear, but from a rage that had been building for 15 years. That night, Emily sat in her Queen's apartment, but she wasn't mourning her rejection, she was hunting. Her laptop screen glowed with Richard Blackstone's medical records as she cross-referenced them with her grandmother's death certificate, looking for connections that would explain the feeling of recognition she'd seen in his eyes. What she found made her blood freeze with the cold certainty of someone discovering they'd been living inside a lie. Stage 4 hepatocellular carcinoma, 6 months to live. The same disease that had killed Rosa Rivera 15 years ago, in what Emily now realized hadn't been a natural death, but a carefully orchestrated murder disguised as medical research. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing databases with skills she'd learned from her boyfriend Marcus, a hacker who specialized in exposing corporate crimes. What she discovered in Richard's buried files made her grandmother's treatment at Queen's General look like what it really was: human experimentation on poor patients who'd never consented to being guinea pigs. Rosa Rivera hadn't died from cancer. She'd died from an experimental drug that Richard's company had tested on charity patients, using their poverty as leverage to turn them into unwilling test subjects. The drug that had killed Rosa was the prototype for the same medication Richard was now trying to bring to market after 15 years of refinement built on the corpses of people too poor to refuse his generous offer of free treatment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, Gloria. Mija Mrs. Linda Chen says her nephew works at a hospital. He might know something about Abuela's treatment. 3 generations of Rivera women had lived with the lie that Rosa died because they couldn't afford proper health care. The truth was worse: she'd died because they couldn't afford to refuse health care that was designed to kill her. Emily opened a new document and began typing an email that would either expose a murder or get her killed for trying. If Richard Blackstone thought he could dismiss her because of her background, he was about to learn that poverty had taught her skills Harvard couldn't provide, including the ability to survive in a world that wanted her dead. Mr. Blackstone. She wrote, her fingers steady with 15 years of accumulated rage. I know what you did to my grandmother, and now I'm going to do something about it. Richard's phone rang at 3:47 a.m., jarring him from the morphine-addled sleep that had become his nightly torment. The cancer eating his liver was cosmic justice, delivered with medical precision, and somewhere in his drug-clouded consciousness, he knew he deserved every moment of agony. Sir, his assistant's voice was tight with panic. There's an email you need to see immediately. It's about the Rosa Rivera situation. Richard's hands shook as he reached for his tablet, not from chemotherapy, but from the sudden terror of someone whose carefully buried crimes were clawing their way back to the surface. The sender name made his heart stop. Emily Rivera. The granddaughter of the woman he'd murdered was sitting in a Queen's apartment with evidence that could destroy him. Mr. Blackstone. The email began with the clinical precision of someone who'd spent years studying the molecular structure of poison. I know what you did to my grandmother. Rosa Rivera didn't die from cancer. She died from experimental drug, Protocol 7-alpha, that your company tested on charity patients without informed consent. I have her medical records, the real ones, not the falsified death certificate you filed. Richard's breath came in short gasps as he read analysis so precise it could only have come from someone who'd spent years studying the molecular structure of the poison he'd used to kill her family. Emily had somehow accessed classified research files, autopsy reports that should have been destroyed, witness statements from nurses who'd been paid to stay silent. Your current liver cancer shows the same cellular markers as the patients who died in your illegal trials. The email continued with devastating accuracy. The universe has a sense of irony, doesn't it? You're dying from the same disease you gave to dozens of innocent people. The email ended with words that chilled him more than his approaching death. I've spent 3 years developing a cure for the cancer you created, Mr. Blackstone. My nanoparticle delivery system could save your life. The question is, do you deserve to live when you murdered my grandmother for profit? We need to talk. Tomorrow, just you and me. It's time to discuss terms. Richard set down the tablet, understanding that his empire was built on a foundation of corpses, and now one of those corpses had sent her granddaughter back to collect the debt. The poor girl from Queens wasn't here to save his life. She was here to decide whether he deserved to keep it. 15 years earlier, 8-year-old Emily Rivera had sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed in the charity ward at Queens General Hospital, holding a hand that felt like papery skin stretched over bird bones. Rosa Rivera had cleaned office buildings for 40 years, her immigration papers always just slightly out of order, her English never quite good enough to demand the treatment that money could buy. When the cancer came, it came with an offer that seemed too good to refuse: free experimental treatment from a pharmaceutical company that claimed to be testing breakthrough medications on volunteer patients. What Rosa didn't know was that she wasn't a patient, she was a test subject in an illegal drug trial designed to kill her while gathering data for Richard Blackstone's profit margins. Mija Rosa had whispered from her hospital bed, her voice barely audible over the machines that were monitoring her murder, disguised as medicine, "Promise me you'll learn to fight the things that kill us." Emily had made a promise she was too young to understand, but one that would shape every choice she made for the next 15 years. Around them, the charity ward operated with the efficiency of organized slaughter doctors who administered experimental drugs without explaining the risks, nurses who recorded data, while patients died a system that used poverty as leverage to turn human beings into laboratory rats. Dr. Sarah Blackstone had been different. She'd knelt beside Rosa's bed and tried to explain the real diagnosis in careful Spanish, her blue eyes bright with the desperate compassion of someone who'd discovered her husband was using her medical expertise to commit murder. "Rosa, I need you to know that what they're giving you isn't medicine. It's poison. But it was too late. Rosa had already been exposed to Protocol 7 Alpha for 3 weeks, and the cellular damage was irreversible. Dr. Sarah could only hold the dying woman's hand and promise that her granddaughter would receive the education needed to fight the systems that had killed her. When Rosa died 3 weeks later, Dr. Sarah attended the funeral and pressed an envelope into Gloria's hands, $5,000 and a note that would change Emily's life. Science is the only weapon powerful enough to fight the inequalities that kill us. Your daughter has the intelligence to wield that weapon. Make sure she gets the chance." Dr. Sarah Blackstone died in a car accident 2 months later, murdered by her own husband for threatening to expose the illegal drug trials that had become his most profitable venture. But her belief in Emily had become a sacred trust, a promise passed from one generation to the next, like a family heirloom made of hope instead of silver. Now, 15 years later, Emily understood the cosmic irony that had brought her full circle. The man who'd dismissed her was the widower of the woman who'd saved her. The executive who'd judged her background was the murderer of both her grandmother and the doctor who'd tried to save them both. Dr. Jennifer Blackstone stood in the parking garage of Stanford Medical Center, but she wasn't reading her father's medical records. She was uploading Emily Rivera's research to a secure server owned by Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Richard's biggest competitor. 20 years of estrangement had been a carefully constructed lie. She'd been working to destroy her father's empire since the day she learned he'd murdered her mother. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her handler. "At Meridian Target has made contact. Proceed to Phase 2. Remember, we need both the research and the evidence. The girl is expendable once we have what we need." Jennifer stared at the message, feeling the weight of decisions that would determine whether Emily Rivera lived or died. She'd spent 20 years planning her father's destruction, infiltrating pharmaceutical companies, building networks of researchers who'd been victimized by Richard's empire. The innovation competition email she'd helped Emily receive was part of an elaborate trap designed to get the young researcher close enough to Richard to expose his crimes. But Jennifer hadn't planned on Emily being so brilliant, so determined, so reminiscent of the mother she'd watched die. Sarah Blackstone hadn't perished in a car accident. She'd been murdered for threatening to expose Richard's illegal human experiments, killed by the same man who'd shared her bed and promised to love her until death did them part. Jennifer typed a response to her handler. Complications have arisen. The Rivera girl may be more valuable alive than dead. Her research could revolutionize medicine. The response came immediately. Negative. Orders are clear. Extract the research, eliminate the witness, proceed as planned. Jennifer deleted the messages and drove toward the airport, knowing that in 24 hours either her father would be exposed as a mass murderer or Emily Rivera would be dead, and she was the only person who could determine which future came to pass. The daughter's return wasn't about reconciliation, it was about justice, served at absolute zero. But looking at Emily's revolutionary research, Jennifer realized she faced an impossible choice: destroy her father and potentially save thousands of lives, or save Emily and let Richard's crimes remain buried forever. Emily stood outside Blackstone Industries the next morning, but this time she wasn't alone. Jennifer Blackstone emerged from a black sedan that screamed federal authority, her face carrying the kind of determined calm that preceded either salvation or execution. "Ms. Rivera," Jennifer said, her voice carrying an authority Emily hadn't expected from a supposedly estranged daughter. "We need to talk before you see my father. There are things about your grandmother's death that make this more complicated than simple revenge." They rode the elevator in silence, but Emily could feel the weight of secrets pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Jennifer's medical credentials were real, but everything else about her felt carefully constructed, like a person wearing another person's life as camouflage. "You probably think you understand what happened to Rosa," Jennifer said as they passed the 20th floor, where Emily had been humiliated days earlier. "But my father's crimes are part of something bigger, a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government and industry." Emily's breath caught as Jennifer continued. "My mother, Dr. Sarah Blackstone, discovered what Richard was doing to charity patients, the illegal drug trials, the falsified consent forms, the systematic murder of people who trusted him to heal them. When she threatened to expose him, he killed her and made it look like an accident." The elevator opened to reveal Richard Blackstone waiting in the hallway, but he looked like a man facing execution rather than reunion. Cancer had carved hollow spaces in his cheeks, but fear had carved deeper spaces in his soul. "Emily," he said quietly, her first name feeling like a confession on his lips. "Jennifer, I've been expecting both of you." They convened in his office, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Emily spread her research across the conference table, while Jennifer positioned herself between Emily and the door, not as protection, but as containment for whatever was about to unfold. "Your nanoparticle delivery system is remarkable," Richard said, studying her work with the focused intensity of a dying man who'd found potential salvation. "But you didn't develop it just to treat cancer, did you? You developed it to kill me." Emily met his eyes with the unflinching directness of someone who'd spent 15 years preparing for this moment. "My grandmother died because you poisoned her in illegal drug trials. Now you're dying from the same disease you gave her. That's not coincidence, that's justice." Jennifer's hand moved toward her purse, and Emily realized with crystalline clarity that whatever was about to happen, the three people in this room represented three different agendas that couldn't all succeed simultaneously. "What if I told you," Richard said quietly, "that Rosa's death was ordered by people who make my crimes look like charity work, that the illegal drug trials were just one small piece of a conspiracy to develop bioweapons targeting specific ethnic populations?" The air in the room felt charged with electricity as Emily processed the implications of Richard's words, while Jennifer calculated whether her 20-year plan for revenge was about to be derailed by a truth too large for simple justice. The Blackstone Industries board meeting 1 week later was a war council disguised as corporate governance. Emily sat at the conference table, no longer the dismissed charity case, but the woman holding evidence that could collapse the pharmaceutical industry. Around her, 12 executives debated not whether to fund her research, but whether to let her live long enough to complete it. "The Rivera situation has become untenable," declared Charles Morrison, the CFO, whose Harvard MBA had included coursework in corporate assassination. "She knows too much about Protocol 7 Alpha, and her research is too valuable to remain in unauthorized hands." Victoria Henley, whose inherited pharmaceutical fortune came from Nazi drug experiments during World War II, studied Emily with the cold calculation of someone who'd perfected the art of legal murder. "The girl has outlived her usefulness. Perhaps it's time for an unfortunate laboratory accident." But Emily had spent the past week studying Richard's files, and she'd learned that every person in this room was part of the conspiracy that had killed her grandmother. They weren't debating business strategy, they were debating how to dispose of a witness who'd become too dangerous to ignore. "Before you make any decisions," Emily said quietly, standing with the calm authority of someone who held enough evidence to destroy everyone present, "you should know that I've made certain arrangements. If anything happens to me, copies of all Richard's files will be released simultaneously to every major news organization, the FBI and the International Criminal Court." She pulled out a tablet and projected images onto the room's display screen: government contracts, autopsy reports, financial records showing payments to researchers who'd conducted illegal human experiments. "Project Genetic Justice," Emily continued, her voice steady as a scalpel. "Operation Selective Mortality, the Ethnic Cleansing Initiative. You've been using pharmaceutical research to develop bioweapons targeting specific ethnic populations. My grandmother wasn't killed for being poor. She was killed because her genetic profile made her ideal for testing chemical weapons disguised as cancer treatment." The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that preceded either total surrender or total war. Richard Blackstone, pale and gaunt, but somehow more commanding than ever, looked around the table at faces he'd conspired with for decades. "Gentlemen, ladies, I believe Ms. Rivera has presented us with a choice: confess our crimes and face human justice, or continue our conspiracy and face something much worse." Emily smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd spent 3 years developing weapons specifically designed to destroy the people in this room. "You see, I didn't just create a cure for cancer. I created a cure for the specific cancer you've been giving to people like my grandmother, and I've weaponized it." The vote wasn't about funding Emily's research anymore. It was about whether they'd rather face prosecution for war crimes or something infinitely more personal. 6 weeks later, Richard Blackstone lay in a private hospital room at Mount Sinai, receiving the first doses of Emily's experimental nanoparticle therapy. But the treatment wasn't just fighting his cancer, it was fighting something deeper, rewiring his brain's neural pathways in ways that Emily had never anticipated. "The nanoparticles are affecting more than just malignant cells," Dr. Grace Chen explained to Emily as they reviewed Richard's brain scans. They're targeting areas of the limbic system associated with empathy, moral reasoning, and emotional processing. He's becoming neurologically incapable of the psychopathic behaviors that defined his entire career. Emily stared at the brain scans showing her nanotechnology accidentally creating something unprecedented, a cure for evil itself. Richard's capacity for remorse, previously suppressed by psychopathic neural architecture, was emerging with devastating intensity. "Emily," Richard said, from his hospital bed, his voice carrying a weight of genuine anguish that would have been impossible before the treatment, "I need to tell you something that will change everything between us." Through the hospital room window, Jennifer watched with the cold calculation of someone whose 20-year plan was approaching its climax. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message, Phase 3 authorized. Eliminate all witnesses, make it look like treatment complications. But inside the room, Richard was confessing truths that his enhanced neural pathways could no longer suppress. "Your mother, Gloria, she didn't just work as a cleaner in my building 24 years ago. I assaulted her. You're not just fighting to avenge your grandmother, you're fighting the man who's your biological father." Emily's world tilted as she processed the revelation that her genius hadn't come from determination alone. It had come from inheriting the same cognitive patterns that had made Richard capable of building a pharmaceutical empire, but filtered through poverty and love instead of privilege and hatred. The monitors surrounding Richard's bed suddenly began alarming as his vital signs crashed. Jennifer entered the room with a medical syringe, her face set with the determination of someone about to complete 2 decades of planning. "I'm sorry, Emily," Jennifer said, moving toward Richard's IV line. "But some monsters don't deserve redemption even if science makes it possible." Emily realized with horror that Jennifer wasn't here to save her father. She was here to ensure that his confessions died, with him taking Emily's research and the evidence of government conspiracy to the grave. At 3 a.m. alone in the hospital laboratory, Emily discovered the final piece of a puzzle that had been 15 years in the making. The nanoparticles she'd designed weren't just changing. Richard, they were changing everyone exposed to them, including herself. Every time she'd tested the technology, every breath of laboratory air had been rewiring her brain towards something that wasn't quite human anymore. Her laptop screen flickered, and suddenly she was looking at a video message that had been programmed to activate when someone with her exact genetic markers achieved her level of nanotechnology integration. "Hello, Emily," the woman on screen said, and Emily's breath stopped as she recognized Dr. Sarah Blackstone. "If you're seeing this message, it means you've successfully recreated the consciousness enhancement technology that Richard killed me for developing." Emily stared at the AI reconstruction of the woman who'd tried to save her grandmother, understanding that this message had been waiting 15 years for someone with the intelligence and determination to complete Sarah's work. "I didn't die in a car accident," the AI continued with Sarah's voice and memories. "I was murdered because I discovered that our nanotechnology could do more than cure cancer. It could enhance human consciousness to the point where concepts like greed, hatred, and violence would become neurologically impossible." The truth hit Emily like a physical blow. She hadn't accidentally developed a cure for evil. She'd recreated the exact technology that had gotten Dr. Sarah Blackstone murdered by a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government and industry. The consortium killed me because they realized that a technology capable of eliminating human cruelty would make their entire power structure obsolete. Sarah's AI explained, "A world without psychopaths is a world without tyrants." Emily's hands trembled as she understood the scope of what she'd stumbled into. Her grandmother hadn't been killed for being poor. She'd been killed because her genetic profile made her ideal for testing countermeasures against the very technology Emily had now perfected. "You have a choice," the AI continued. "Use the technology to heal the world, knowing that powerful people will do everything possible to stop you, or destroy it, knowing that millions will continue to suffer from diseases and cruelties that could be easily prevented." Through the laboratory windows, Emily could see government vehicles surrounding the hospital. Jennifer's 20-year plan hadn't been about exposing Richard's crimes. It had been about containing a technology that could end human suffering by ending humanity's capacity for unnecessary cruelty. The poor girl from Queens had accidentally become the most powerful person on Earth. The question was, what did you do with the power to remake human nature when everyone else wanted to kill you for having it? News of Emily's breakthrough spread through channels that governments couldn't monitor because the people spreading the information were connected by nanotechnology that operated beyond traditional communication systems. Every person Emily had treated, every researcher exposed to her particles, was now part of a collective intelligence that shared knowledge at the speed of thought. Dr. Grace Chen found herself understanding molecular biology at levels she'd never imagined possible. The hospital janitor who'd been exposed to Emily's nanoparticles while cleaning her laboratory discovered he could solve complex mathematical equations. Nurses throughout Mount Sinai began demonstrating enhanced empathy that made traditional healthcare hierarchies impossible to maintain. "We're not just treating individual patients anymore." Emily explained to the group that had gathered in her Queen's apartment a strange collection of enhanced humans who'd become connected through nanotechnology that was rewriting the fundamental basis of human consciousness. "We're treating the neurological basis of human cruelty." Marcus, her hacker boyfriend, looked up from his laptop with eyes that now processed information at superhuman speed. I've been tracking the government response. They're not trying to arrest you anymore. They're trying to contain what they're calling a consciousness contagion." Through his enhanced neural networks, Marcus could see the panic spreading through intelligence agencies worldwide. Emily's nanotechnology wasn't just healing individuals, it was creating a network of enhanced humans who could communicate, coordinate, and solve problems at levels that made traditional power structures obsolete. Jennifer appeared in the apartment doorway, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood federal agents whose eyes carried the glassy look of people who'd been exposed to neural suppression drugs designed to prevent enhancement. Emily Rivera, the lead agent, said, "You're under arrest for development of illegal bioweapons and conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism against the United States government." But Emily smiled with the calm confidence of someone who understood that their nanotechnology had already spread beyond any government's ability to contain. "Agent Morrison, yes, I know who you are. I think you'll find that arresting me would be inadvisable." She held up her tablet, showing a map of Manhattan with thousands of red dots pulsing across the city. "Every person who's breathed the same air as someone in my network has been exposed to consciousness-enhancing nanoparticles, including everyone in this room." The federal agents looked at each other with dawning realization that they were facing someone who'd weaponized empathy itself. "The particles are designed to activate based on stress levels," Emily continued. "Threaten me or anyone in my network and you'll trigger enhanced consciousness in every exposed individual simultaneously. Kill me and you'll create a species-wide evolutionary event that will make your current power structures neurologically impossible to maintain." Jennifer realized that Emily hadn't just cured her father's cancer, she'd accidentally triggered the next stage of human evolution, and every attempt to stop it would only accelerate the process. Emily Rivera stood at the center of her transformed laboratory, no longer just a scientist, but the nexus of a network that spanned 6 continents. Through quantum-entangled nanoparticles, she could feel the consciousness of enhanced humans in hospitals and universities, government buildings and military bases, corporate boardrooms and charity wards. The electromagnetic pulse designed to disable her technology was 30 minutes from launch, but Emily's network had spent the past 6 hours doing something unprecedented. In human history, they'd solved the fundamental problems that created unnecessary suffering. Dr. Grace Chen, her perception enhanced beyond human limitations, had redesigned cancer treatment protocols that could cure any malignancy for less than $10 per patient. Marcus had accessed global financial systems, redistributing pharmaceutical profits to fund universal healthcare. Enhanced researchers worldwide had simultaneously published breakthrough treatments for every major disease affecting humanity. But the most profound change was happening in the enhanced humans themselves. Politicians found themselves neurologically incapable of corruption. Corporate executives discovered they couldn't tolerate profit-driven decisions that caused human suffering. Military commanders realized they couldn't issue orders that would result in unnecessary casualties. Emily Richard said from his hospital bed, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse powered by technology that made deception neurologically impossible, "I need you to know that I've transferred control of Blackstone Industries to a trust fund managed by families of our victims. Every dollar we made from suffering will be spent to heal the damage we caused." Through their neural link, Emily felt the cascading effects of Richard's decision. Enhanced pharmaceutical executives across the network were making similar choices, their transformed consciousness unable to tolerate the cognitive dissonance of profiting from preventable death. 15 minutes until pulse launch. Marcus reported, but his enhanced perception had detected something else. The military personnel preparing to activate the weapon had been exposed to Emily's nanoparticles during their surveillance operations. They were beginning to question orders that would commit genocide against an evolved human subspecies. Emily felt the moment when soldiers around the world began refusing commands that would cause unnecessary harm. Police officers started arresting corrupt officials instead of protecting them. Intelligence agents began leaking classified documents that exposed government crimes. "They can't stop us anymore," Emily said to her global network, feeling the presence of enhanced minds in every major city on Earth. "We're not conquering the world, we're healing it at the neurological level." The enhanced humans weren't taking over existing power structures. They were making those structures obsolete by becoming neurologically incapable of participating in systems that caused unnecessary suffering. Emily looked out her laboratory window at Queens, seeing her old neighborhood with perception that could process the suffering and potential of every life simultaneously. Children were growing up with enhanced teachers who couldn't tolerate educational inequality. Grandmothers were receiving medical treatment from doctors who'd lost the ability to price discriminate based on patients' economic status. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Linda Chen. "Mija, something wonderful is happening. The doctors at Queen's General are treating everyone for free. They say they can't remember why they ever charged poor people for life-saving medicine." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 7 billion human consciousnesses waiting for evolution. Her phone buzzed with updates from enhanced humans' worldwide crime rates, dropping as empathy increased, pharmaceutical companies voluntarily releasing patents, governments beginning to redistribute wealth because hoarding had become neurologically uncomfortable for enhanced leaders. But the electromagnetic pulse designed to destroy her network was still 15 minutes from launch. Emily Rivera stood at the window of her laboratory, watching government vehicles surround the hospital like white blood cells attacking an infection. Through her quantum-enhanced perception, she could feel the panic rippling through military command centers worldwide as enhanced soldiers began questioning orders that would harm civilians. The EMP countdown displayed World 1423 on her screen, but Emily was no longer afraid. Her network had spent the last 4 hours doing something unprecedented, They'd created a backup plan that would activate if the EMP succeeded. Every enhanced human on Earth carried dormant nanotechnology that would activate upon electromagnetic disruption, spreading consciousness enhancement to every living person within a 50-mile radius. Trying to stop us will only accelerate the process, Emily said to the federal agents monitoring her through building security systems. She knew they could hear her through the surveillance equipment they'd installed. Your EMP will create a species-wide evolutionary event that makes our current power structures impossible to maintain. Marcus appeared beside her, his enhanced perception tracking the military positions with inhuman precision. I've been monitoring global communications. Enhanced humans in every major capital are simultaneously revealing classified information about government crimes. The entire power structure is collapsing in real time. Through their neural link, Emily felt the cascading effects of transparency. Corrupt politicians were confessing their crimes because lying had become neurologically painful. Corporate executives were returning stolen wealth because hoarding caused physical discomfort. Military commanders were refusing to launch weapons because violence against innocents triggered unbearable empathy. "Dr. Rivera," came a voice through the building's PA system. Emily recognized General Morrison, the man who'd ordered her grandmother's murder 15 years ago as part of the bioweapons testing program. "We're prepared to offer you a deal. Voluntarily contain your technology and we'll provide immunity for all enhanced individuals currently in your network." Emily smiled with the calm certainty of someone who'd accidentally triggered the next stage of human evolution. "General Morrison, I think you misunderstand the situation. I'm not controlling this network. We're all part of something larger than individual will. Your immunity offer assumes we want to go backward, but evolution doesn't work in reverse." The countdown reached E010 as Emily felt the consciousness of enhanced humans in military command centers worldwide. They were accessing classified systems, releasing decades of suppressed information about government experiments on civilian populations. Every cover-up, every illegal operation, every murdered witness was being simultaneously revealed to international media. "You killed my grandmother because she had the genetic markers that made her ideal for testing bioweapons," Emily said, her voice carrying across global communication networks through enhanced hackers who'd infiltrated every secure system. "Rosa Rivera died so you could develop racial-specific diseases to use against populations you considered expendable." General Morrison's voice cracked with something Emily had never expected to hear from a career military psychopath: genuine remorse. The enhanced soldiers around him had begun affecting his neural patterns through proximity exposure, and 15 years of suppressed guilt was surfacing all at once. "Dr. Rivera," he said quietly, I need you to know that your grandmother's death wasn't supposed to happen. We were told the subjects would experience mild symptoms, temporary discomfort. When we realized the mortality rate, I tried to stop the program." Emily felt the truth of his statement through the quantum entanglement her technology had created between enhanced minds. General Morrison had been another cog in a machine designed to commit genocide, and his guilt had been eating him alive for 15 years. "I believe you," Emily said, understanding that healing wasn't just about punishing perpetrators, it was about breaking cycles that created them. But belief doesn't resurrect the dead or undo systemic murder. What it can do is ensure this never happens again. The countdown reached 0500 as Emily made her final decision. She could deactivate the backup protocol, accept the EMP, and let her network die to preserve the existing power structure. Or she could let evolution take its course, knowing that triggering species-wide consciousness enhancement would fundamentally alter what it meant to be human. "Marcus," she said quietly, Are you ready to change the world?" He nodded, understanding that they were about to cross a threshold from which humanity could never return. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that your grandmother would be proud. You've turned her murder into medicine that could heal our entire species." Emily typed her final command into the laboratory computer, a quantum signal that would activate every dormant nanoparticle in every enhanced human worldwide. The EMP would trigger it, but she was going to ensure it happened regardless. "For Rosa Rivera," she whispered, pressing enter, as the countdown reached 0001. The electromagnetic pulse struck with the force of artificial lightning designed to burn out every electronic device within a 100-mile radius. But instead of destroying Emily's network, it triggered the evolutionary protocol she'd embedded in her enhanced humans. Every enhanced person on Earth became a transmission node, releasing consciousness-expanding nanoparticles into the atmosphere at precisely the moment when electromagnetic disruption would accelerate their spread. The military's attempt to contain evolution became the catalyst that triggered it globally. Emily felt the moment when her technology reached critical mass, when enough human minds became enhanced that the shift became irreversible. Across the world, people were discovering they could no longer tolerate systems that caused unnecessary suffering. Police officers were refusing to arrest people for poverty. Judges were dismissing cases based on racial bias. Corporate boards were restructuring companies to prioritize human welfare over profit margins. The poor girl from Queens had accidentally become the woman who rewrote the neurological basis of human civilization. Not through conquest or coercion, but by making empathy as automatic as breathing. General Morrison appeared in her laboratory doorway, his face transformed by the same enhanced consciousness that was spreading across the globe. "Dr. Rivera," he said, tears streaming down the face of a man who'd spent 50 years suppressing all emotion. "How do we even begin to make amends for what we've done?" Emily looked at him with the infinite compassion that her technology made possible, seeing not just the murderer, but the broken child who'd been shaped into a weapon by systems designed to create psychopaths. "We start," she said simply, "by making sure no one else has to grow up in a world that rewards cruelty. We start by healing the conditions that created people like you." Through the laboratory windows, Emily could see the sunrise over Queens, where her grandmother had died 15 years ago in a charity ward that prioritized profits over patients. That world was ending. In its place, enhanced humans were building something unprecedented, a civilization based on the radical proposition that every life had equal value. The revolution hadn't been fought with weapons or violence. It had been fought with medicine that made hatred neurologically impossible. Emily Rivera, the granddaughter of a murdered cleaning woman, had accidentally discovered the cure for human cruelty itself. And in a twist that Rosa Rivera would have appreciated, the powerful had been healed against their will by the same type of person they'd spent centuries trying to destroy. The last gift hadn't been Richard's money or Emily's technology. It had been Rosa's belief that science could fight the inequalities that kill us, a belief that had grown across 15 years of poverty and determination into nanotechnology that made inequality neurologically impossible to maintain. As enhanced humans across the globe began the work of healing a species, Emily opened her laptop and began typing a message to her mother. "Mami, I finally found a way to make them pay for what they did to Abuela, not with punishment, but with something better. I made them incapable of hurting anyone ever again." The poor had inherited the earth not through conquest, but through compassion that could rewire the human brain. And in the end, that was the most revolutionary act of all.